Thank you everyone for joining us for Stump the Experts with Slingshot25. For anyone who is visiting us for the first time, let me just tell you a little bit about Slingshot25 and who we are and what we do. We are a business consulting company, and we help companies by creating programs and solutions in the areas of leadership and change management. And our presenters today, Courtney, Smock, and Jackie Pelland, worked in corporate America for 25 years each before starting Slingshot25, and they were doing this kind of work. So they are indeed experts. Our products and services can be put into three primary buckets: change management and communication, team performance, leadership training and coaching. And after years of developing these kinds of programs and services for corporate America, they are now doing it at Slingshot25. They are also both IPEC certified coaches, which gives them a little bit unique perspective and approach, and that's ingrained into everything we do. So if you are looking for these kinds of products and services, please check us out on our website. I'm keeping this short because we have 30 minutes. You have submitted some pretty meaty questions, so thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Jackie Pelland, and we're going to find out if you've indeed stumped our experts today.
Oh gosh. Well, of course, in a way you have. You made us really think about some of the challenges that you're faced with. Some of you gave us some really detailed questions and the circumstances upon which you are asking those questions. So we appreciate that. It helps us kind of get a sense of the things that you're struggling with. So I will tell you this. I will tell you that 2/3 of the questions that you submitted fall into roughly the same category. You know, all of you had a little bit different circumstances around why you're asking the question. You asked it a bit differently, but 2/3 fall into this space of how do I have hard conversations, the uncomfortable, the awkward, the queasy conversations that are required to keep people moving forward, getting work done together, caring about what happens next. We sometimes call this accountability. 2/3 of you asked a question a bit about that. But we're going to single out one because I think it captures the spirit of what many of you were asking. So I think we have that question here on the next slide. How do you give feedback? And in this case, to a high performer who has recently missed the mark. So this question really summarizes the gist of what a lot of your questions were, which is, oh my gosh, I have to give feedback. I have to have a conversation that's not going to be easy. Of course, it's not easy. It's emotional. There's a lot of emotions involved in this. And we are not really, our brains aren't really even designed to deal with the social fallout of having these kinds of conversations. We don't really like to have these conversations. That's normal. And we have to do it in a way that will actually help somebody, in this case, a high performer that has recently missed the mark. So we've got to try to keep a lot of things intact when we're having this conversation. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this. Many of you, again, asked a similar form of this question. But here's the first thing I'm going to start with. I want you all to just think about this question specifically. You've got to give feedback to someone who is a high performer. Now, they've recently missed the mark. The first thing I'm going to say, and I'm not going to reveal who asked this question, and as I'm saying it, I don't actually recall exactly who asked this question. But I want you to think about the situation itself. If this is a situation where this high performer has just sort of made what I will call a molehill-sized issue, like they've just kind of stepped off the path a little bit, then I might recommend you start with a molehill-sized feedback solution, which we like to call the nudge, which is a really simple way. It sounds something like this. Hey, high performer, obviously you would say their name. Hey, high performer, I noticed, and then just describe what you noticed. I noticed that you showed up a little bit differently in that meeting, and it didn't have a really great effect on your colleagues. So you describe what you noticed, and then you simply say, is everything okay? And you're done. That's called the nudge. And you can, as you think about that, you can imagine what that does. It essentially kind of puts somebody on notice. It says, I noticed, I'm watching, I see you, I care about you. I even asked, is everything okay? And it doesn't bring a big heavy-handed solution to a molehill-sized problem. That is if it is a molehill-sized problem. But I'm guessing the person who asked this question and the circumstances that drove this, you're probably not dealing with a molehill. You're probably dealing with a situation where you really do need to sit down and talk through the circumstances and the choices and the decisions and the actions that this person took to miss the mark. And again, that showed up in a lot of the questions that you asked, a similar kind of situation. How do I do this? How do I have these conversations? So I'm going to give you one word that I want you to take away from this because we're going to move fast here. But there's one word that I really want you to bear in mind when you are facing a situation like this. And that is the word prepare. I mean, that sounds so obvious, but we fail to do it. We roll into these conversations like maybe just, sort of having a conversation with ourselves in our heads on our drive home, and it feels like I'm ready because what you've done is you just sat and thought about all the things I'm going to say. And that is probably only marginally better than not preparing at all. And it might actually be worse if I think about that. I mean, really prepare. And I'm going to give you a couple of things to do to help you prepare for these conversations. And I'm going to go through these fast. We're not taking a lot of additional time to talk through these today because our time is limited, but you will have the recording. So feel free to go through the recording in slow-mo if you need to. All right. The first thing I want you to do in preparing is to, number one, think about what do you want from the conversation, from this feedback conversation? What do you want? And I want you to think specifically in terms of what change do you want the other person to make? Because this is why you give feedback. You give feedback, in this case, to this high performer who has missed the mark. You want them to change something so that that doesn't happen again. The missing the mark doesn't happen, and they hit the mark, exceed the mark next time. You want a change. And so I want you to carefully think about what change do you seek by having this conversation with this person? Spend a little bit of time there. And if you find that you can't answer this clearly, you're not ready to have a feedback conversation. And when I say clearly, I at least mean earnestly that you can make an attempt, because I know that the people you work with do really complicated things. And it's not, I need you to create 15 widgets next time, not 14. It's probably rarely that clear. But I want it to be at least in earnest, that you could, by having the conversation, articulate the change that you want the person to make. And if you really can't do that, number one, you're not ready to have a feedback conversation. And you might want to start to question, are you really needing to have a feedback conversation? Or are you just trying to, sometimes they'll use the very punchy statement, are you just trying to land a punch? I mean, I'm sure not physically, right? We don't think you're actually trying to punch someone, but are you just trying to state your anger, state your grievance, state your self-righteousness, whatever it might be? Are you just wanting to get in there and just say, I didn't like that? That is not feedback. That's not helpful feedback. It's probably some form of feedback, but it's not useful or helpful feedback. So that is the very first step. Is it's not about just stating what you want to say, that the impact it had on you. That could be part of it, but be very clear that you need to be able to articulate the change you need the person to make. So that's step one. Step two is to consider perspectives. And we'll give you 3 perspectives we'd like you to consider. One, of course, is yours. It's like, what is your perspective on this situation? And a little trick is to write it down. It can be bullet points. It can be on the back of a napkin. You're not necessarily going to be sharing that with anyone. Just write down what you're telling yourself about this situation. And when I say what you're telling yourself, that's your thoughts, right? What are your thoughts about this situation? What's the narrative you have? I want you to write it out, because when you write it out, it forces you to really explain it to yourself, at least. It forces you to really think about what you want to say to this person, what you think is going on here. And then I want to warn you to not believe everything you just wrote. Don't believe everything you think. There are other perspectives on the situation. It's not that you're completely wrong. I'm not suggesting that. It's just I want you to take even your own so-called truth with a grain of salt. Don't believe everything you think. Realize that there's a lot of cognitive biases and errors that are going to be involved here. You don't have to worry about all of those. Suffice to say, don't believe everything you think, which is why you're going to take the next perspective, which is the other person. I want you to ask yourself the question, what might the other person be thinking and feeling? Now, you won't know for sure, but by, forcing yourself to consider that, when you force yourself to consider that, in this case, this is someone who's a high performer. You should be thinking something like, gosh, they are a high performer. And all of a sudden they're getting corrective feedback. That's probably not going to land very well. They're going to be, my guess is they're going to be feeling suddenly a bit insecure, maybe even afraid. They're going to have a reaction of, uh-oh, I'm not all that in a bag of chips that I thought I was. So this is going to start to change. Then you can see how taking this perspective will change how you show up and the kinds of words that you will use to help move this person forward. So that's the second perspective. The third perspective is what we call the fly on the wall. Or you can think Courtney, Smock, or Jackie Pelland. Like, what would a neutral third party, if they were to come in and I were to chat with them about this, what kind of thoughts would they have? And we ask you to do this one because it starts to take a little bit of the temperature out of the situation. Things, as you know, get twisted around office politics and, all the drama that we find in our workplaces. When you think about someone who steps in from the outside, they don't get impacted by all of that. They tend not to even know about all of that, and they tend to have perspective that sort of flies above all of that. And it's not a perfect thing, but you can try to get that situation out on your own. So those are the two things I will give you. There are two more, but we don't have time to cover them. But I will tell you that we do have a feedback prep guide. Look at this, it's right here. We have a feedback prep guide, and we're going to send it to you along with the recording for this session. So you will get all of these steps in more detail along with the final two steps of preparing for feedback. And I will also let you know, and you're going to see this on a slide at the very end of the session today, is we'll be glad to spend 8 hours with you talking through how to do this really well in a course that we have called Conversations That Move People Forward. There's a lot to this, but hopefully just those few things really got you thinking. Which leads us to the very next question, because I'm moving fast here. I know I'm moving fast, but let's go to the very next question because it's very related. Oh, more feedback. More, I would like someone to do something else kind of question. And this time it turns out to be your boss. I'm going to tell you, it's essentially the same thing. You provide it in the same way. You prepare in the same way. There's nothing different. That person presumably is human. We still work with humans so far today. That person is still human. You should still be thinking about what are they going to be thinking and feeling? What change do I need this person to make? What's the story I'm telling myself? What would a neutral third party say about all of this? With one major exception, because I do not live in fairy tale land. One major exception, which you all know, and is why we got several questions around what we call upward accountability or upward feedback. The big thing that's different here, and we all know it, is the relationship. The relationship. This is your boss. Hierarchies in organizations have nurtured in us this expected idea that people will give downward feedback. Like if you're the boss, you will give it's your job essentially to give feedback to those who report to you. We're also pretty good at having nurtured the idea that we give sideways feedback. We're all working together, and we help each other out and we offer feedback sideways. Although we might give it some lip service, that upward feedback has not historically been nurtured by the nature of hierarchies in our organization. That is still loaded with peril. And, I'd be living in fairy tale land if I didn't say that it is loaded with peril. It is. I wish I could make it different, but the reality is it gets a little bit dicey. And I know why so many people ask this question and that they struggle with it, because it's hard to lead. It's really hard to lead, and not everyone does it that well. And you might be working for someone like that. And so we often want to give upward feedback, but it's really scary. So the relationship is the thing. If you do not, so here's, I guess I'll bring it down to, so what are you trying to say here, Jackie? If you do not have a good relationship with your boss, you're probably not ready to give them feedback, period. Your best bet is to start working the relationship, to kind of set this one down, to set this feedback that you want to give now down and start working the relationship. And there's lots of things you can do to work that relationship. Again, the time is a bit short here, but just start to build like a mutual understanding and respect with that person until you get to a place that you can do all that preparation I talked about and give feedback that will work. Because otherwise you're probably going to get someone who's really armored up, because to get feedback from someone who works for you is even scarier than getting it from your boss. So they're probably going to be much more armored up. And it's okay if the relationship isn't ready, don't give the feedback. Okay, but I want to give an exception there as well. If it is something that is really important, the big deal kind of feedback, then I might suggest you get help. Get help in giving that feedback. If you don't have a good relationship with your boss or a comfortable relationship, the relationship that is sturdy enough to withstand giving this kind of feedback, then I might suggest you get help. And of course, you know that I'm talking about like reach out to someone in HR, reach out to someone higher in the hierarchy if you have a good relationship, but reach out to people who would have more of an invitation, if you will, into giving that feedback. All right. That was like really fast. That was a lot thrown at you. Like I said, you'll have the recording, so feel free if this is you and you're struggling with some of these situations to replay and think about some of the advice that we're offering here. But it gets even worse, doesn't it, Courtney Smock? Yeah,
Doesn't get any
again,
easier.
yep, all in the theme of having hard conversations. Courtney's going to take the hardest one of them all.
Well, yes, they're all hard. They all require courage. We got a lot of questions about, like Jackie said, your questions tell us what you're all dealing with. And I think it's a sign of the times that we got a lot of questions about how to deliver bad news. How do you share messages that people are going to be disappointed about? How do you handle layoffs? How do you handle site consolidations, closings? Like this stuff is really hard. And it comes back to part of change management. And we teach this in our navigating change class is our responsibility as leaders is one of our biggest responsibilities is to communicate business decisions. We have to communicate business decisions. And there's a method, in the class, we teach like the steps of how you communicate business decisions. So in some ways that's the same. You got to tell people what you're doing and why. You have to tell them where you're going. You have to tell them how you're going to get there, and you have to tell them what it means for them. And when the news is hard, right? Like you have to do that if you're going to have a company picnic, you should do those four things, right? But when you do hard things, like maybe there's a change that people aren't going to like. Some of the things that I want you to think about is first and foremost, remember that you can do and people can handle hard stuff. They can deal with truth. They can deal with reality. They can deal with what is much, much more better. That's not the way you say it. It's it's better than handling ambiguity. It's better than wrestling with anxiety of the unknown. Fear of the unknown. People cannot handle not knowing. So just trust that answers, even hard ones, are going to be at some level welcome over not knowing. And when you have to say those things, tell the people the things you don't want to say. One of the things I want you to kind of look for first is just acknowledge the feeling that you anticipate that person's going to have about this. Start because you don't want to give them the bad news because they're going to have a reaction. They're going to have a reaction about something tangible, something concrete. So they're going to get in your face about details and things. Whatever they say back to you, whatever you're scared they're going to say, whatever you're thinking might come up for them, underneath it is a feeling. And that feeling in tough, difficult news is probably a lot of fear, probably a lot of anger, potentially. Right? If they don't think it's fair, they don't think it's just, you are going to see anger. If it's not what they were expecting, you're going to see disappointment, unmet expectations just as human beings, we're disappointed about that. We can survive that, but we want to sit across the table, sit at the conversation with someone who says it's understandable you're feeling that way. Makes total sense that you'd be sad, that you'd be angry, that you'd be disappointed. This is frustrating. This is not what you expected. This is not what you wanted. And I'm here for you and for this. Like, this is, I'm not going to change it, but I know that with this information, you can do something, right? That we'll get through this. We'll figure this out. One of the questions said something like, how do you balance like that honesty with empathy? And to me, honesty is the most empathetic thing that you can bring to these conversations. Brene Brown says all the time, clear is kind. The more clarity, the more honest, the more real, the more transparent that you can be, that's actually the greatest way that you can show people that you care about them while things are changing. You didn't make the decision to hurt them, but they're going to get hurt by the decision anyway. To be honest about that. This is what we did. This is what we decided. This is why. This is where we're headed. This is what it's going to mean and how long it's going to take it to get there. And this is what it means to you. Right? Clear is kind. To acknowledge the feeling first, it's like, how do I do that? It's just saying to people, like, it's understandable that you'd feel that way. It makes perfect sense. It's okay when you're giving bad news to tell the news, and not okay. It's like almost prefer, like, tell them, acknowledge what you think they're feeling, anticipate that, and then be quiet and hold space, create space for them to think and process and react. I'm a talker like that, creating space and sitting on my hands and shut my mouth and just letting people absorb what you told them. Not judging it, not trying to fix it, not jumping in, not talking to fill the awkwardness and the uncomfort you're feeling because of what you said. And then ask them, how are you reacting to this? What's going through your head right now? How can I help? What else can I share? When you deliver bad news, you want to have the conversation, create the space, acknowledge and face the feelings, be brave. Like, that's it. You just got to show up and have the conversation, be honest, and then follow up with people. Depending on the shock value, the gap, the surprise level, the less people can process it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So know and be deliberate. Like when Jackie's saying prepare, 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 I want you to prepare for that conversation. Tell them what you're going to tell them, acknowledge and validate the feeling, check in the conversation, and then put a reminder on your calendar 24 hours later to follow up with them. When you guys know you've done this, you had a tough conversation, you're going back and forth, and then you're like, I wish I would have asked this. I wish I would have said that. Because your brain can't react to shock and process and come up with the best questions. So you go find them, ask them, hey, we had a conversation yesterday. Did anything else come up you want to talk about? Did you have any other questions? How are you feeling today?
Yeah, Courtney, if I could add to that,
Please.
in thinking about just giving performance feedback, so think back to that first question of the high performer that has missed the mark. Once you deliver that feedback, once you've prepared, and you've given that feedback to the best of your ability, and it won't go smoothly. Not every, maybe it will, but they don't typically. They get pretty messy, and that's okay. Is like, I love Courtney, how she said, schedule 24 hours from now or 24 work hours from now, whatever it may be. Just follow up and just ask, how are things going? Is everything okay? I know that conversation wasn't easy, because it turns out that about 80% of people, after they receive difficult performance feedback, they look for another job. That's And most of them don't do anything with that, but they could, you know, they could. And so you're going to jump in at that point where they're feeling kind of low. And because we all do this, you know, we start to tell ourselves a story about, you know, we're not enough, we are not good enough. And then we start to get angry or resentful and seek blame. You know, all of those things are perfectly normal human things to do. And so it turns out that that is a prime time for when people go start to perform a job search. So you're just gonna check back in with them. And right when they're in that moment, because we know they're there, you're gonna check back in with them and do it just exactly as Courtney's suggesting. I'm still thinking about you. I know that was hard. What other comments or questions do you have for me?
And then I'll throw one other quick thing in before we wrap up. Some of the questions that said we're delivering bad news ask things like, how do you reassure people when let's say you had to deliver bad news. How do you reassure people that the bad news is over? Like, when does this stop? What if if it's a layoff, what if I'm next? Are we done? And I just want to acknowledge, like, that is like, all of you are going to experience that because human beings have a hardwired need to feel secure. And when you deliver bad news, it's a security threat and they want to know it's over. Like, if you've ever done a tornado drill, there's some point where they get on the thing and say, hey, all clear, you go back in the building. Your employees want that.
I just want to point out you should not go outside
Oh,
during a
sorry.
tornado
I'm
drill.
mixing emergency analogies. Pick your thing, right? Yes, it's all clear to go back in the building after a fire, not in a tornado. Whoops, you get me. So there is no such thing as an all clear in your business. Things weren't clear before the bad news, and they're not going to be clear after. We go to work in organizations that always have some sort of threat of people making decisions that impact our security. This is life, right? You can walk down the sidewalk and trip on something. There are threats in our life. That is the nature. So when you have that, like, again, we're going quick today, but when you have that, we had a threat realized, and now everyone's hypersensitive. Go back to Jackie's advice about perspective. How is it different? Like, they did it. We always have that. There's always business decisions being made. The organization always looking for opportunities to optimize things. Like, that's no different than how you came to work on Monday. And so, however that sounds, looks, and feels, just pull back. What's some perspective? How often do we do this? How often has happened in the past? Where are we really? I didn't know on Monday if we were going to have this conversation. I certainly don't know tomorrow, and you're not going to either. And we're going to get back to work. Kind of the be where your feet are, work on what we can work on, affect what we can affect, and try to not focus on the things we can't control. Acknowledging that it's a scary time, and it's probably going to be healthier, happier, more productive to be involved, engaged, doing our work, and we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so that's what we have for you on that. I mean, time flies. We're trying a new format just because we send these out as recordings. People know we want to get the extra information to you. So I want to thank you all for coming. If you want, oops, is there a slide on, are we done? Oh, if you guys want more on the classes we mentioned, I want to highlight these. We do have the Navigating Change Master class, the Truth of Leading Others class that really gets into how to be a leader, and the Conversations class that Jackie mentioned, where we just unpack how to have conversations. So you might want to take a peek at those if some of this piques your interest. That's what we have for you today. Please follow us on LinkedIn if you're not. We have Facebook. We have Spotify. You can listen to Jack Chat. I'm like, what's that little icon logo, Kim Garrett? Yes. So lots and lots of free content. If you're not getting Jack Chat webinars, our newsletter, please follow us so that you can get that, because we have lots to say and lots of people have questions right in the vein of the place that our resources give you stuff. So that's what we have today. Thank you for tuning in, asking questions. See everyone soon.
All right.